So you're a jazz guitarist feeling lost when it comes to structuring your solos. Man, I feel your pain. It's a huge topic with so much to consider. But the good news is you're in the right place, because by the end of this video, you will understand the 3 core components that comprise the structure of any masterfully crafted jazz guitar solo. So grab your parchment and quill, because I got another banger for you. Now, in order to structure masterfully crafted jazz guitar solos, we first need to understand the substance of jazz guitar solos. What are those licks? What are those chords? What are those rhythms, right? Now, the prevailing wisdom seems to be transcribe the things that you like and then integrate what you learned from the transcription into your own vocabulary. However, I know from my personal experience of 25 years as a full-time musician, plus a master's degree in jazz performance, not to mention I've helped a fuckload of guitarists achieve jazz fluency. The old transcription integration method, it's not helpful at the early stages of your development. And the reason being is because at those early stages of development, you don't have any context for the licks that you're learning from transcriptions. Not to mention, the licks that you transcribe are not your licks. And that means that you'll never be able to play them with the same level of conviction as the OG master who minted the lick. And that's the more fundamental issue with transcription at all levels of development. Although it is beneficial research, it misses that fundamental creation principle of musicianship. See, you need to mint a sizable amount of your own licks before you could ever benefit from learning someone else's. Your licks are the context I was referring to. Then it becomes this process of plugging in the things you learned in transcription into a well-established vocabulary. That is a great process at a high level of development. So at that early stage of development, the obvious question is, well, how do I develop vocabulary if not taking the things I learned from transcription and integrating those? Well, I'm going to provide you with a clear answer to that question in the next part of this video, where we examine these 3 components of a masterfully crafted jazz guitar solo. So the first component is harmonic substance. So the harmonic substance is going to be the tune itself. Once again, always presupposing a form, because that's going to provide us with a set of chord changes that we can then develop some vocabulary around. So in this lesson, we're going to use the good old-fashioned jazz blues. Some people call it the complex blues. It's the 12-bar blues with all the chord changes. And there's actually a few different options of all of those chord changes. But we're going to keep it as simple as possible while staying true to the complex blues, right? So let's find the simplicity in the complexity. So now our harmonic substance is going to break into 2 areas. One is going to be chords, one is going to be melody. Now, something interesting to note here is that the note choices for your chords are going to be slightly different than the note choices for your melodies. In both situations, we're using chord tones. Both situations assume the same theoretical principles of harmony, but the application is slightly different from one to the next. This is a deep nuance. So let's first start with the melody notes, the single notes. What's going to be the harmonic substance of those melody single notes? 80% of the time, it's going to be straight triads, right? 80% of the time. Now that other 20%, that's going to be the nice, beautiful icing on your cake, and you're going to want that. But let's just focus on that 80% chunk to start with. This is where the whole concept of pathways has come in, right? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to generate a triadic pathway. The only rule here is I just need to play the right triad at the right time. But to develop these pathways, I'm actually going to do it out of time, rubato. So you just got to make a choice here. I'm going to choose a good old-fashioned open root position on the 1 chord. Right? Great. Now the next chord change, that B flat. right? What I'm going to do is I'm just going to voice lead to the B flat, right? So I started in F and now everything is kind of predetermined at that point because all I'm going to do now is follow the path that this one chord in an open root position triad is going to take me to. So that means that I know F is a common tone, so I'm not going to move that. So it's going to end up being a second inversion of some kind. The A, that can go up a half step to B flat, and that C, that can go up a whole step to D, and boom, I've got this one now, right? So this one to this one, right? That's the 1 to the 4 chord, right? That's a nice, beautiful pathway. Now you might be thinking, man, that's not enough notes. It's enough notes, dude. Wait till we get to part 2. I'll show you why it's enough notes. I'll give you a little foreshadow. You know, it's about rudiments and basic variations, right? So I'm not just gonna go, I can also go like, notice a different fingering there, right? Looking for fingering optimizations. Right, so there's a few levels to consider, but we really just want to keep it on this basic triadic level so you see where the variations can show up, even rubato. Wait till we're on level 2 and we're actually talking about rhythm. For now, it's just like rubato, rudiment, basic voice leading, right? So now we're over here, right? That next chord, the passing 4 diminished. Only one note has to change. Right? I'm following the voice leading here, so what do you think happens next? Where does that want to go? I think it wants to go here. Right, so now, that's back to F major, but it's now a first inversion instead of root position, simply because I wanted to support the melody. So the melody was being flawlessly voice led, and I already know that if the 5th of my triad is on top, I can play either a closed root position or an open first inversion, right? Closed root position, open first inversion. Both have C on top. Okay, see what I've done here? Just a pathway, right? You see how deep this could go, right? If I go through the whole blues like that, dude, that's your homework assignment. You have to go through the whole blues like that. And you'll be like, dude, are you kidding me? And it's like, exactly. That's why I start you on just this chord progression. That's why you gotta start right there, you see? Oh man, welcome to my world over here of systematic meticulousness. And see, we still haven't even talked about the chords yet. We might as well talk about the chords. Instead of just going forward in the blues and looking at every chord change, this is an opportunity for us to go really deep, because if you can understand what to do with just this 2-bar sequence we're talking about here, which is completely iconic, right? That passing 4 diminished. I mean, one of the most important chord changes you could ever imagine. You want to get really clear on how you might navigate this on every level, because it's going to keep coming back, right? So the logic of this approach to musical development is to go as deep as possible on a few key concepts. For example, passing diminished, that would be a great one, right? Ultimately, that depth compounds at scale when you apply it to, say, a complete form like the blues, or then a bigger form like a 32-bar form like rhythm changes, or a 38-bar form like All the Things You Are. I think that's 38. It's got something wacky in there. And it does feel like you're standing at the foot of Mount Everest right now, but I can tell you from experience that once you're actually just focused on the right things, it compounds very quickly over a couple of practice sessions, right? You're talking about in a week, you could map your pathways of triadic voice leading through a blues, and you would be an actual wizard. It would be like some of the best practice you've ever done in your life. You would see a real transformation by just committing to simply mastering those triadically voice-led pathways through the blues. And so that's what I'm going to tell you to do right here. But what I'm also going to do is I'm going to talk about the chords. Now, this is going to be an intellectual challenge. I will not lie. This is not something I talk about very often in YouTube videos, because now it's getting complex. So what you might want to do is just isolate this part of the video that I'm about to describe in your mind as like, okay, he's getting complex. I don't need to understand this right now. But at the same time, I want you to be very aware of the chord element here. Okay, there's no escaping it, there's no avoiding it. So one of the techniques I use as a teacher is like, I will just expose you to something. You don't have to understand it, but it's holding a space in your mind that we're gonna actually fill up later, right? So right now I'm just leaving the space of chords, okay? And I said earlier, right, this duality of you're applying harmony differently in chords than you are in melodies, but it's the same harmonic system, you know, same chord tone thing, right? It's just that melodically we're focusing on that triadic voice leading, and with chords, we're actually going to be focusing on using more of the extensions or the upper structure notes in chords. And that's just a basic nuance of jazz musicianship. The chord voicings tend to have the upper structures and the extensions. Melodically, the substance seems to be very triadically oriented with, say, chromatic approach thrown in there. But now this duality emerges. I mean, we've talked about this extensively inside of Systems for Creation. This is a well-established topic. And you'll see this when you study the precedent of music and you listen. Like, what is Charlie Parker really playing? What is Coltrane really playing? And then corroborate it with like different styles. Like, what is Bach really playing? And you'll see melodically, triadic voice leading is really present. Like I said, 80% of the time in your melodies, it's really that triadically voice-led principle. But over here in the chord realm, it's a bit different. So we have to look to precedent to understand this. Like, what did jazz musicians who played chords play? What was guiding their chordal vocabulary? Now, this is where I reference that principle, the fat shape principle, right? So this is Lenny Breau, Joe Pass, Herbie Hancock, Bill Evans, more recently, Kurt Rosenwinkel. Oh, Ed Bickert also, before Kurt Rosenwinkel. Ahmad Jamal, I mean, you name it. It's very ubiquitous, this fat shape principle, okay? So this is the idea that there are these three primary shapes that guide every chord voicing that you would ever use. Now, I've got an extensive course on this because it's a multi-layered concept. To really understand chords, you couldn't possibly expect to understand it from just a YouTube video here, but I'm at least going to explain it in context, like what's relevant in the context of this part of the blues as it relates to basic chord construction, right? So this first chord of the blues, I might use this fat shape 2 on the flat 7 of the 1 chord to get the sound of F7. That's the sound of F7. That's E flat, A, and D. Now, it's very common to play a flatted 13th on that chord when going to beats 3 and 4. That's going to set you up to hit the B flat 7. That may be triggering a bell in some of your minds. It's an aspect of the blues that maybe you haven't explored on a deep level, but at the same time, you're like, that sounds like blues. So all that's going on is I'm using the principle of voice leading from the chord perspective, and I'm using this fat shaped chord system to just inform my actual chord voicings. Because without that fat shaped chord system, it's this big question of, well, which notes of the chords do I play, right? I'm playing 3-note chord voicings right here. But technically an F713 has F, A, C, E flat, G, B, D. As 7 notes, technically. But I'm playing 3. So it's the classic question of, which of those 7 notes do I play? And the fat shape principle is simply just giving you that answer, right? You know, oh, in F713, fat shape 2 works on the flatted 7th. And this is the whole simplification mentality of a high level of musicianship. I mean, Joe Pass talks extensively about this exact concept, and he uses fat shapes like nobody's business. Joe Pass is famous for stating that chords all break into 3 categories: major, dominant, and minor. That is factual. And to truly understand the fat shape principle, you have to start to see it that way. Okay, so this is actually setting us up for now the second component, phrasing. So just like harmony, I mean, phrasing is a massive, massive concept. It's definitely infinite, whereas harmony is finite. So keep that in mind. So welcome to phrasing, where there's literally an unlimited possible number of decisions that you can make to express your creative impulse. So I'm going to break it down to 3 primary classics. These could be considered frameworks. So the first one, call and response. Call and response. Ultimate. Now, call and response is one of those things that you know it when you hear it, but you couldn't really specify exactly what it is. No one can, right? It's just classic, like, human communication. We all know when we hear call and response. But your idea of call and response is just as valid as anybody else's. The point is that you're focusing on this concept of call and response, and just by focusing on it, you will tap into that Akashic level resonance that call and response elicits from any listener or anybody who's also playing alongside with you. So in my mind, I think about call and response on this level of like, okay, maybe I call with a melody and I respond with a chord, right? It could have went a lot of different directions right there, but think about how that might sound like. 3, 4. That was just focusing on call and response. Now, I only use triads. I know I played the whole form because I really want to illustrate a call and response basic principle, and also to illustrate the point of I only played triads right there. Imagine playing a solo jazz guitar gig where all you did was basically build on that. You'd get hired every single night of the week, dude. Put a bass player and a drummer in there, it just got easier. But now you can see really clearly what call and response could look like when you're really solid on your chord voicings. And just like I was doing in that first component, harmonic substance part of the lesson, I'm just creating pathways that I'll improvise on later. So I have chordal pathways, just like I have melodic pathways. And then the practice is compounded when you just have multiple pathways, right? This is not the only way I can play an F7 chord. I could also play it up here, same F7. But now it's fat shape 3 off the major third, giving me 3, flat 7, and 9. Whereas fat shape 2 on the flatted 7th is giving me flat 7, 3, 13. Now another phrasing principle, pattern continuity. This is another one of those subject things where you know it when you hear it. Now I think a combination of pattern continuity and pattern interrupt is ultimately the iconic choice. So maybe something like this. Right? See that pattern interrupt? But it just fit the chord change exactly perfectly. And that's like, oh, is that a perfect confluence? Exactly. When you're aligned to that big picture of the tune, stuff like that will happen. You'll think of a pattern interrupt and it will usually be because the form actually inspired you to do it. And then on a bigger level, there's no pattern interrupts. You know what I'm saying? Because the farther you zoom out, you're always going to see pattern continuity. The farther you zoom in, you'll see pattern interrupts, but they're really just responses to pattern continuity. So that's going to be phrasing, right? 3 major focus points: call and response, pattern continuity, pattern interrupt. Just focus points is all they are. They're mental primers. They get you thinking a certain way so that you can focus outward instead of inward, right? Just focus on, okay, I'm going to do pattern continuity instead of, oh, I got to make sure I play this lick perfectly. You know what I'm saying? And that brings me right to the third component. Dynamics. All right, so just quickly, what do I mean by dynamics? So on a simple level, dynamics could just be the ability to create a solo that builds like the arc of a story and has a clear culmination point and then a nice little drop off before the next solo begins. Like in a live situation, everyone knows when the peak of your solo is, and then it's so obvious when it's over that the next person is like already musically gonna pick up that baton. That's what dynamics are all about. I mean, that is huge, right? So when you see it that way, well, that's not that hard to accomplish, right? Because if you just play the form of the tune accurately, there's always going to be an obvious exit point, and that exit point is what you're building that arc around, right? So like every time you don't take the exit and you play another chorus, you just built up the dynamic, right? Because you're going to play that next chorus at a higher or a more intense dynamic than you played the previous chorus, right? So your phrasing is building along with the dynamic intensity that comes with each new chorus. Now, at some point, the intensity will culminate, but you don't really need to focus on when that culmination happens. It's going to happen very naturally if you simply just focus on playing the form as accurately as possible. Now, the truth here is that if you mess up the form, that's going to screw up your entire dynamic arc. And then think on a bigger level, what does an audience notice when they're listening to you? The number one thing they notice is your dynamic arc. They notice the intensity of what you're doing. That's where you're communicating. You're communicating through your level of intensity and through the continuity of your overall solo. Even if someone's not a musician, they can follow your continuity if you are being really precise about it. In the same way that I'm probably speaking some high level concepts to you right now, but because I'm speaking with such clarity and precision, you're actually following me, even though this is probably stuff you've never thought about. That's how you want to structure your jazz solos. You want them to be coherent to non-musicians, because then think about how much easier it is for actual musicians, especially the ones you're playing with, to support you and anticipate your dynamics. So the trick is the form will guide your dynamics. If you just play the form accurately, you don't have to consciously think about dynamics. And we're now tapping into the alchemy and the intuition of this whole thing. That's why I always say it's mentality. You need to know how to think about this stuff because it's so easy to lose the forest for the trees in these types of situations. And musicians are famous for that exact thing, right? They'll focus on like one scale for like a year and then wonder why they never got any better because they're lost in a forest just looking at this one tree. The solution to that exact problem is focusing on the form. The form would be the forest. As a musician, you want the big picture overview overview of the forest. You want that form in the forefront of your mind. Now, we'll always drill down deep into the forest and examine a single tree. That's what we're doing on that first component of harmonic substance, right? That's just like looking at the individual trees, the individual chord changes within that larger form, within that forest. But being aware of the big picture as you're drilling down, that's the keys to the kingdom. You want to be thinking on the macro and the micro and everything in between all at once, but in practice, you can drill down to specific parts of that spectrum. All right, so that was another deep lesson for you. You can see why some guidance could be helpful, especially if you want to go to the highest level of jazz proficiency. I've got a step-by-step roadmap. Takes less than 6 months to get a master's level education. When you're working alongside me inside my school, we've got a really great curriculum, 3 live classes per week, a full course library, plus my interactive ebook, which is where I'm constantly developing new lessons, which then become a part of my course library. And what's great about these is they're interactive, so people in the program comment, and that helps me to actually sharpen the points of those courses. So link for that in the description. That's Systems for Creation. Now, I know most of you guys already have fretboard mastery, so I might be releasing some lessons that are specifically just about how to organize fretboard mastery, just stuff from the archive. You click on the Systems for Creation link, you can actually book a demo lesson with me. First one is free, but obviously you guys know I have many offerings that all cost money, but I'm happy to start with that demo lesson just to get to know each other. Like I said, really grateful for all the support you guys have been showing me. Really great for all the people who have bought the intro package. I mean, now there's like well over 1,000 of you guys who are working through fretboard mastery. Really stoked on the feedback. People are taking that farther than I ever thought they would, and that's always what happens. When people understand these concepts, of course they're gonna take it farther than me. You will do greater works than me, you know what I'm saying? So, see you very soon, my friend.